Hey everyone, we're back again and picked something a bit different and unusual to talk about, which is UAPs. And this is sort of an interesting topic because for decades, this talking about this was a bit of a trap because you talked about it in terms of like UFOs. And the moment you said that word, there's a whole host of associations with that which came in, things like flying saucers and so forth. And so it was a very predictable response of people to that discussion, which was to sort of smirk and move on, which also makes sense. Um, and not because like every sort of strange thing is automatically false, but because that topic had over the decades become sort of like a weird sort of cultural signifier where mentioning that sort of brings in other forms of like woo-woo topics and various sort of new agey nonsense along with it. um, and I think over the last um, well, at least decade and a half or so, I think this the landscape around this topic has changed quite a bit, and not because of any sort of new revelation around or discovery, etc., but because of like a few reasons having to do with things that have changed, and you know we'll get into that, I think, over as we talk about it here. But I'd say like the vocabulary has changed, like how people talk about it has changed, the institutions involved have changed, the sort of who's involved in it has changed, and what is being officially released or acknowledged has changed. And just the biggest example of the last point is the existence of something like Arrow, which is this the all domain anomaly resolution office, which is which again doesn't prove anything, but it does sort of lend this formal location for this discussion. Um, and and there are these other sort of documentaries and movies, etc., for which don't necessarily have to say anything, but being present means that the general discourse has changed. For example, I recently saw Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day, and a few other high profile documentaries around disclosure came out recently. um, and again, none of this sort of counts as evidence, but the point is the previous tone of let's just shut up because this is embarrassing doesn't really apply any longer. And there is this weird now overlap between sort of the shifts in culture, the shift in sort of a national security stance. There's a shift in maybe like public knowledge about this and the science of this, etc. uh, and so we can talk about it now, although I think we have to talk about it differently, because the old way of approaching it, or the question that framed it, was a question like, quote, do you believe in UFOs, right? Which I think is the wrong way to look at it, and it's a terrible way to approach it. And instead, the way we can approach it now is to ask something like, what do we do with anomalous observations that don't fit into obvious categories, and then we can have a serious discussion because the answer or most of the answers around this are going to be boring, um, and boring is not the same as fake, but also not fake is not the same as aliens, right? So uh, it's a bit of a double negation there, but we can talk more about this. So yeah, so I mentioned things that have changed, and the first one I said was vocabulary, and I think that's a big one. Even though a lot of people see it as oh, we just changed some acronym, but I think it's much more than that, because the acronym used for most of the 20th century, or especially the latter half, was UFO, which sounds like, okay, it's a flying object, that's unidentified, so what's the big deal? But it is a big deal because in sort of pop culture, and in people's heads, I think UFO just became equal to flying saucer or equal to alien craft, and it brought along with it all of these sort of cartoon slash movie associations of little gray beings and secret hangars, and and so it got overly associated with this thing, this this craft or saucer, etc. It was sort of a nuts and bolts, actual physical metallic sort of thing. And then the frame becomes, oh, does this exist or not exist, or do you believe in it or not believe in it, which is just a waste of time. Instead, the right, I do like how we have this new acronym, which means unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is like a good shift, because and it's not some sort of even though there are lots of these, like, bureaucratic acronym changes. I think this one is good because it widens the frame for us, because instead of saying, here is we observed this craft over here, and instead we say, well, we observed something and we measured something and we recorded something, and now let's figure out what it is, which is good because it's a more boring premise, which is better because then you can treat it like a scientific question, and you can frame it as something that was observed but has not been resolved. Therefore, it's anomalous. Therefore, it's added to the list of things that we have to kind of figure out over time. And the other, there's one more aspect of this, which is that this UFO discourse, if I may, from earlier, typically only offered these sort of two roles. Either you're a total sort of true believer, and you have to go along with whatever other true believers believe, or you're a complete debunker, and you get to feel smart by dismissing the crazy people. And both of them sort of rely on some sort of oversimplification, as in sort of the group of true believers, feel like it's all about these alien spaceships, and it's the truth about these alien spaceships is being suppressed, and only they know the truth, etc. And the other side, will obviously say, well, everything is weather balloons and there's nothing to see here. And so it's sort of two sides of the same coin. But the good thing about where the discourse can be now is that you can remain uncertain, right? And in fact, I think you need to be uncertain about it in a disciplined way. Yeah, I think that's true for a few other things as well. But and therefore you have to reject both of these essentially identity-based views of it, which is one side of the coin is this I want to believe side, and the other side is well, only crazy people believe this kind of side. So instead you sort of adopt a triage-based approach, which is, well, here are some things that are observed. Let's kind of try to categorize them, see what is common, what is not common, what are the different buckets we can put them in, what are some options for what this can be, etc. And so you adopt some sort of decision tree based view of how to approach this, and you stay away from a question like, are aliens real? And I over time I've come to realize that question doesn't even make sense, and so I just don't get into it. Instead, we start by saying things like, okay, is there a phenomenon here to observe? Which means, like, okay, your first level of triage is to rule out things like hoaxes and rumors and misperceptions, sort of someone spouting nonsense, unreliable observations. We can even assume that most of what you might get is 99% might be garbage. So it could be aircraft badly photographed, low resolution. There could be balloons, could be drones. Someone once showed me this diamond shaped thing, and I was like, wait, this could just be a kite. you know there are satellites, there are sensor artifacts. Something moving along may just be a glare in the camera. People don't judge distance and speed properly. I saw this thing where there's a parallax effect and people aren't aware of it, so you don't know how fast something is moving, especially when you're inside something that is moving fast, like a plane. So a lot of stuff is ruled out just by uncorrelated sensors and things like that. Or someone recording something on their smartphone and trying to present it as evidence, etc. So most of it can be ruled out as garbage. And so then we can say, okay, once we remove most of these reports, what is left? And sort of being skeptical and saying, look, the phenomenon can be real. Any phenomenon can be real, even if most of the reports about it are false. Medical rumors, for example, can be nonsense, but diseases are still real. We have this. We have a lot of hype, for example, around technology. Most of it is dismissible and it's overhyped. But there's always some underlying. There might be some underlying truth to things. So saying that most of this is garbage is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it helps us filter out and focus on the few things that matter. And that means that what is left can take on more importance. And of course, we also have to be aware of there being sort of reliable observation or good data with bad interpretation. Especially when there are human observers who may have unreliable memory, or who may have gone through some stress or fear, etc., when reporting things. And so I guess you can model some sense of, okay, well, if any of this is true, how much of this is true? Is it like 10%, 1%, or something less, etc. And like, if it is true, like, what does it mean? One interpretation is that the actual sensor data is accurate, where there's like some sort of video stream. So one level of being true is that it's not AI generated. It's not fabricated, etc. The other one is about whether your interpretation is correct or not. And I think that's where most of the ambiguity lies, because people always want to jump to some some explanation for things. And so saying that the video is real very quickly tends to imply something like, oh, this is proof of X, or something like that, or let's say an extraordinary object has been observed in this video, etc., which is, I think, it's false. Or it's a false way to look at it, because you are jumping to some sort of classification assumption based on the truth of raw data. So yeah, I'm sort of going around in circles a little bit, but just because I want to separate out these two things. And I'm over stressing on the fact that you need to look at the fact that the phenomenon exists independently and validate its truth first before you try to jump to what it means. which is sort of the opposite of how a lot of discourse happens or has happened until now, where the framing is sort of set a priori, and you're looking for evidence, assuming that it will be in one of these two buckets, assuming that if it is validated, it will necessarily prove this claim that you already had beforehand. So anyway, yeah. Where was I? Yes. So you got to rule out things like sensor artifacts, or speed misjudgment, things like that. And there was a real case. I think that it has some name in the archives. This is one of the things that was released early in this in this bucket of let's call it we mentioned Arrow from Pentagon. So yeah, there was an early bucket of disclosure, which was this object racing across the ocean at a very high speed. And I think that one did turn out to be, I don't want to call it fake, but let's use a different word, explainable, where I think that one turned out to be a case of false parallax, where once you take into account the geometry of it, the altitude that you're at, the speed you're moving at, then it turns out to be the effect of parallax. And this is not, we should not see this as something disappointing. It's a good thing, because we should expect some famous cases to become less mysterious, because the goal is not to find exotic things. I think that is the trap. We want to find things that are filtered out well. So once we assume this video is true, how do we distinguish between different interpretations of it, right? And so the second branch of the decision tree is, well, is this human technology or not? And this should also have a very high bar, because if you, I guess, just statistically, if you observe the weird thing near in a restricted airspace where sensitive platforms are being tested, near a military base where there might be something that is that something experimental is being tested, it could be experimental craft. And in fact, many sort of quote unquote UFO sightings of previous decades did eventually turn out to be test flights of new experimental planes at the time. I don't remember if this was specifically like the new stealth bomber or the Blackbird or something, but there was a lot of this. And so this second branch of our decision tree also plays a role in catching or explaining away a lot of observed stuff. And that's a good thing, because again, calling something not aliens is seen as a boring thing, but that's fine. That's just you applying sort of the right hypothesis to it and moving sort of slowly, step by step through things. The other third part of this decision tree, I would say, is trying to figure out whether this is new physics or not, because there are physical phenomena that are not yet well understood. Things like in the realm of, say, plasma physics have some very unintuitive sort of behavior, and things can be fascinating without being intelligent. Observations can be anomalous without being a craft. You can observe something moving in an unusual way without it being a flying saucer. So first, there's an error about bad data. Then there could be a thing about ordinary objects. The third could be again, human technology, but just classified systems. The fourth can be unknown physics, environmental effects. And only after this, after filtering out all this, we get to this, the idea about, okay, there could be something intelligent. Again, not aliens, just intelligent. It's not the same thing. because before we can ask, what kind of intelligence, we have to say, does this even imply agency? Because maybe you're stumbling across responsive behavior, or evasive behavior, or just some sort of random interaction with something. Because the other bar to apply there is to say, is this um, yeah, is this like a random pattern because something moved in some random way and it wasn't explainable and you thought it was intelligence? So again, doubling down on this fact that you can't just jump to non-human intelligence. You have to rule out all of these things. And one good example um, is this a classic sort of 2004 or 5 or whatever, the Nimitz encounter. Because and it's interesting because it's the kind of case that we can walk through this decision tree. It's not just a random light in the sky. You have these Navy pilots, you have this military exercise environment, you have visual testimony, you have sensor and radar claims, you have an object, excuse me, that was described by these, professional observers as having that is behaving in a very strange way. And so, can it survive these different gates that we have put up, this human error, bad data, classified systems, etc. And the answer is, well, you applied those filters, and yes, this is a candidate for triage, or let's say further triage. We can call it even like the residue of this filter, this set of sieves that we put up to filter out all of these things, and that is good because that gives us genuinely interesting cases. The case becomes interesting only after you have given the boring explanations a chance to explain things away. And I guess that's really the question, or we can frame the question in front of us that way, which is there anything else that is left after we have gotten rid of the misread sensors and the possible high altitude balloons and drones, which there are more now than ever before, and must be easier to make mistakes with them. Atmospheric effects, which are more numerous than you might think possible. And so so that is truly the right focus, not some sort of like pop culture derived sort of are they here type thing, or what is the government concealing type thing, or what is when will full disclosure happen type thing. That's not it. It's the right way to look at it is like a series of case studies in the nature of perception, and how to make sense of the truly anomalous phenomenon. And even then, the right next question is not, is it aliens? And if there's any one takeaway from this episode at all, is like, stop talking about aliens. All right, it's like jumping too far ahead, because what I would say is, even when you get to that thing about like, okay, this is exhibiting intelligence, what should your priors be? What is more likely? People jump to this sort of alien hypothesis mostly because of culture. Okay, we've had movies, television, paperbacks, books aplenty, everything that's leading you towards, there's these lights in the sky, and that is somehow equal to visitors from another world. But if you apply sort of like this Occam's razor approach to this, it should lead you to ask, what are the assumptions you are making here? And if you truly think about it, this extraterrestrial hypothesis makes a lot of assumptions. This travel across impossible distances, and this weird motive, like why bother to do that, to travel, across in interstellar space and then do this random crap, and behave in this evasive way, this try, it's not impossible. It's maybe it's true, but it's weird to me because you are jumping to something that is extremely improbable. Because if you say, well, this is unexplained phenomenon, so obviously it is aliens. What do you mean obviously compared to what? Compared to faulty sensors, compared to classified human technology, compared to unknown physics, compared to simple institutional confusion or secrecy, etc. I would say it's not it's not the obvious jump. And so that is why it's important to take that a diversion on that branch when you say something is due to intelligence, and say, well, is it if it is unexplained, if it is not, if it is intelligent and it is not human, does it necessarily have to be extraterrestrial? Because can it not be non-extraterrestrial and yet be unknown, non-human intelligence? That's where I want to end today, because there's a lot more that you can go from here, and I spent a lot of time sort of circling this the place this decision tree ends, because it's not something that I myself would have considered possible earlier, but I think in this Occam's razor approach, where you consider what is most likely, it's a bigger leap, I feel, to jump to the conclusion that there is some interstellar travel, and which is then resulting in this weird sort of evasive presence, and either there is nothing that is not explainable, but if there is, it's likely somehow terrestrial. And I spent a lot of time getting here in this video, but let me end here, and maybe we'll take it further next time or some other time. All right, that's all I have for today. Thanks.